You're not family, Rachel. Sit in the back, my brother whispered at Mom's funeral. I froze, holding the program with my name missing. Then the lawyer cleared his throat. My name is Rachel Whitmore, and I'm 36 years old. I'm a public school librarian in Ohio. Quiet job, quiet life. I've always been the steady one in the family, the kind of person who shows up without being asked and leaves without taking credit. My older brother, Daniel, runs a small construction company. He's loud, confident, and always treated like the one who'd carry the family legacy forward. Holidays, Sunday dinners, family decisions. He was always at the center of them. Growing up, I watched how differently we were treated. He got the encouragement. I got the expectations. He was celebrated for small wins. I was expected to handle the hard things without complaint. After Dad passed, I moved back home for 2 years to help Mom through her early-stage dementia. I learned her medication schedule. I drove her to appointments. I sat with her when she cried because she couldn't remember a word she'd just said. I wasn't rich or glamorous. I didn't have a big house or a flashy car. I had a small apartment I barely used because I was always somewhere else, doing what needed to be done. But I had something they didn't expect. At the funeral, when my brother told me I wasn't family, it wasn't just cruel. It erased everything I'd quietly sacrificed. What hurt most wasn't the whisper. It was that half the room heard him, and no one corrected him. If you've ever been the quiet one who did all the work while someone else took the credit, hit subscribe. I see you. Share your story in the comments. And if you've ever been underestimated by your own family, click hype. Let's talk about it. The morning of the funeral, I arrived early to help with the arrangements. The church smelled like old wood and white lilies, the kind of heavy floral scent that settles in your chest and stays there. Was carrying a stack of printed programs when I noticed something wrong. My name wasn't listed under immediate family. I walked to the funeral director and asked him quietly about the seating arrangement. Before he could answer, Daniel appeared beside me. She's just a guest, he said. Flat. Final. Like I was a distant neighbor who had shown up out of obligation. The director looked uncomfortable. I felt the color rise in my face. I was moved behind cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. I sat in the third row, holding a program that described Daniel as Mom's devoted son and primary caregiver. I read those words 3 times. During the eulogy, Daniel stood at the podium and said, "Mom depended on me for everything these last few years." His voice cracked just enough. The room responded with soft nods. I leaned forward. I moved back home for her, I whispered to the cousin beside me, not really meaning for anyone else to hear. Daniel heard. He turned slightly and said, low enough that only the nearby rows could catch it, "You live there because you couldn't make it on your own." I didn't respond. I pressed my hands together in my lap and looked straight ahead. At the burial, Daniel gathered a circle of relatives near the grave and said it plainly. "The house and savings will stay with me. It's what Mom wanted." He looked around the group like a man reading a verdict. There's no point pretending anyone else is entitled. A few people exchanged glances. I heard someone inhale sharply. Then Mom's longtime lawyer, Mr. Keating, stepped forward from the edge of the gathering. He was calm, unhurried. "The will reading is scheduled for tomorrow," he said. "Both children are required to attend." Daniel smiled. "There's nothing to discuss." He turned back to the family, already accepting congratulations. As I walked to my car alone, I heard footsteps behind me. Mr. Keating fell into step beside me and said quietly, "Your mother made changes 6 months ago." I stopped walking. Daniel was still holding court near the grave, laughing at something someone had said. He hadn't heard a word. That same evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "You can collect your things next week. I'll supervise." He had already changed the locks on Mom's house. The home I had lived in for 2 years. The home where I had learned every creak in the floorboards, every draft from the kitchen window. He also moved to freeze me out of Mom's small savings account, the same account I had helped her manage and monitor for years. Then came the family group chat. Daniel typed, "Rachel barely visited. Don't let her rewrite history." He sent it at 11 at night, when he knew people would wake up to it and form opinions before I could say anything. Within hours, aunts were messaging me privately, asking why I had abandoned Mom in her final years. I didn't respond with anger. I responded with facts, calmly, one message at a time. But the damage had been done. People had already chosen a version of events, and that version didn't include me. A few days later, Daniel called. His tone had shifted. Softer now, more careful. "I want to offer you something," he said. $5,000. Walk away peacefully. I let the silence sit for a moment. "It's more than you deserve," he added. "I'm not negotiating grief," I said. He laughed. It was a short, dismissive sound. "You can't afford a legal fight, Rachel. Be realistic." I didn't argue. I didn't explain myself. I simply said I'd see him tomorrow and ended the call. The extended family had already assumed he'd won. Nobody called to check on me. Nobody asked for my side. I appeared cornered, isolated, and outmatched. But I was quietly steady, because I knew something Daniel didn't. During the 2 years I lived with Mom, I handled everything on paper. Insurance renewals, bank correspondence, medical authorizations. I kept copies of every document, not because I suspected anything, but because Mom's memory was fading and someone had to stay organized. About 6 months before she passed, I walked into the kitchen one morning and found her sitting at the table, crying. Not the confused crying that sometimes came with her condition. This was clear, present. She looked at me and said, "I need this to be fair, Rachel. Promise me." I sat down with her. I listened. And because her memory had become unreliable, I asked if I could record our conversation so we could refer back to it. She agreed. I have that recording. I also had something else. Over the preceding year, Daniel had sent Mom several emails asking her to transfer money into his construction business. Large sums. The emails were careful in their wording, but the pattern was visible if you laid them side by side. I never intended to use any of it. I filed it all in a folder on my laptop labeled simply, "just in case." It wasn't a strategy. It was a habit of care. Daniel thought I was soft. He saw a librarian who drove a sensible car and didn't raise her voice. He mistook quietness for weakness. He had no idea I was prepared. Mr. Keating had worked with our family for 25 years. He had drafted wills, handled property transfers, and helped Mom update her documents twice after Dad died. He knew our family's history better than most of our relatives did. The night before the reading, he called me. "Your mother was concerned," he said. His voice was steady but careful. In her final months, she made sure there was documentation. She wanted to be thorough. I told him about the folder. I asked if I should bring it. "Yes," he said simply. The next morning, I drove to his office with the folder on the passenger seat. It wasn't thick. It didn't need to be. Meanwhile, Daniel had spent the previous evening telling anyone who would listen that I wouldn't show up. "She knows she has no claim," he told our cousin. He posted online that evening, a quiet tribute to Mom, framed around honoring her wishes. The comments filled with sympathy directed at him. His confidence was loud. He'd already mentally deposited everything. When I walked into Mr. Keating's office, Daniel was already seated at the long wooden table, one ankle crossed over his knee, scrolling through his phone. He glanced up, said nothing. I sat across from him and placed the folder on the table in front of me. He looked at it. Then he looked at me. Then he looked away. The office was small. The air smelled faintly of old paper and coffee. A single lamp warmed the corner of the room. Mr. Keating sat at the head of the table, a set of documents arranged in front of him. Daniel leaned back, comfortable, certain. Mr. Keating began reading the original will. The house and the majority of financial assets were directed to Daniel. Daniel's expression didn't change. He gave a small, satisfied nod. Then Mr. Keating paused. He turned a page. The room was very quiet. "However," he said, "there's a second will, signed and notarized 6 months ago." Daniel sat up. "That's not possible," he said. His voice was still controlled, but something behind it had shifted. Mr. Keating continued reading without looking up. Under the revised will, the house was to be sold, with proceeds split evenly between both children. Mom's personal savings account was left entirely to me. And there was a clause. Any documented financial pressure applied to the deceased prior to signing would result in a reduction of the pressuring party's share. Daniel's face went red. This is ridiculous. She didn't understand what she was signing. Mr. Keating reached into a folder and slid printed copies of emails across the table. The transfer requests, the dollar amounts, the dates. These transactions may qualify under the clause, he said. Daniel stared at the pages. Then he looked up. She agreed to those transfers. She wanted to help the business. I spoke for the first time since sitting down. My voice was calm. She was scared you'd lose everything. She didn't want to say no to you. He opened his mouth, closed it. Mr. Keating said, there is also a recorded conversation, made with the deceased's consent, that may be submitted as supporting evidence if the will is contested. The room felt very small. Daniel turned to look at me. His voice had dropped to almost nothing. You planned this. I met his eyes. No, I said. Mom did. He had nothing left to say. For the first time in my life, he was completely silent. The house sold 3 months later. The process was straightforward. I received my share of the sale and the full contents of Mom's savings account, exactly as she had intended. Daniel stopped attending family events. Some relatives who had sent me cold messages in that first week reached out afterward, quietly, with apologies that arrived in short texts and avoided any real detail. I accepted them without holding on to them. I used a portion of the money to establish a small literacy fund at my school in Mom's name. Every year, it provides books to students who can't afford them. It felt right. It felt like her. I didn't fight for revenge. That was never the point. What I fought for was the truth and the right not to be erased from a story I had lived inside of every single day. What hurt most about that morning at the church wasn't the money I might lose. It was being told I didn't belong. Being made invisible in a room full of people who knew better. But belonging isn't something someone else can grant or revoke. It isn't in a program or a seat assignment or a name on a will. It lives somewhere deeper than that. On a quiet Saturday in October, I drove to the cemetery alone. I stood at Mom's grave for a long time, listening to the wind move through the trees at the edge of the grounds. I whispered, I heard you. And for the first time since the day of her funeral, I felt completely at peace. Have you ever been pushed aside during an inheritance or told you didn't deserve your share? That kind of betrayal cuts deeper than most people admit because it comes wrapped in grief. Share your story in the comments. I genuinely want to hear how you handled it. Subscribe if you believe fairness matters, even inside families. Click hype to help this story reach someone who needs to hear it today. If this story touched you, subscribe. And if you've ever been pushed aside by your own family, share your story below. You're not alone.